In 1971, a prophecy made by an American woman that in the year 2025 is likely to make your heart skip a beat. And the most disturbing part is this. The prophecy claims that the year 2025 will mark a turning point in human history, a decisive moment that could shape the fate of the entire world. So what exactly is this prophecy? Let's find out in today's video. So stay with me and fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you might just tip fortune in your favor if you like and subscribe before this video ends. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to know exactly when your world was about to change forever? To have someone look you directly in the eyes and tell you the precise moment when everything you thought you knew would crumble into dust. It may sound like a simple question, but the truth is far from simple. Because what if the future you discovered was a tragedy that is impossible to escape? In the early 1940s in America, there was a woman with an ability that defied explanation, a gift, or perhaps a curse. She could peer beyond the present, glimpsing events that had yet to unfold, sometimes decades ahead. She could foresee a person's future careers, the moment of fateful romances would begin, and even the exact day someone's life would end. Her name was Jeane Dixon, a name that would echo through the 20th century as a symbol of clairvoyance and prophecy. On a cold January morning in 1942, Dixon found herself face-to-face with one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Carole Lombard, in an upscale salon where America's elite came to gossip and pamper themselves. Something inside Dixon compelled her to approach this woman she barely knew and deliver a message that would sound completely insane to most people. She told Lombard not to fly anywhere in the next 6 months because her life would be in danger if she did. Lombard smiled politely, the way you might smile at a street performer or someone handing out religious pamphlets. She thanked Dixon for her concern, but explained that she had important travel plans and wasn't about to change them based on the warnings of a stranger. Just 6 days later, Lombard's plane crashed into a mountainside, killing everyone on board. The woman who had tried to save her life was left to wonder if she could have said something different, something more convincing, something that might have changed the course of events. The woman behind that warning wasn't some eccentric or idle gossip, as most people thought. She was Jeane Dixon, one of the most renowned psychics in American history, whose visions would go on to predict world-shaking events, from the death of a president to the rise of new superpowers and global upheavals yet to come. In March of 1933, the United States lay in the shadows of the Great Depression. Unemployment had climbed past 25%, crop prices had collapsed by as much as 60%, and over 2 million Americans had lost their homes. It was during this bleak and desperate hour that Franklin D. Roosevelt, officially taking the oath as the 32nd President of the United States. He stood on the inauguration platform, not wearing the grin of victory, but with the resolute gaze of a man who now carried the last hopes of a wounded nation. Roosevelt vowed to rewrite the America's destiny, and through 4 consecutive terms, he achieved what no president before or after has ever achieved. But by 1944, at the age of 62, his body began to falter the iron will that had defined his presidency. High blood pressure, arteriosclerosis, and a host of other ailments cast a shadow over his leadership. But here's the chilling part. Jeane Dixon had seen it all coming long before it happened. One November morning in 1944, the phone rang inside Jeane Dixon's modest home. When she picked up, there was only a short message on the other end. "The president would like to see you," and then the line went dead. Without fuss, Dixon stepped outside, where a waiting car parked just outside her door, which whisked her straight to the White House, a place she had visited once before during a fundraising event, where she had briefly shaken the president's hand. But this time was different. Standing face to face with Franklin D. Roosevelt, there was no talk of war, no discussion of national policy. Instead, the president asked something deeply personal. "Can you tell me how much longer I have in this role?" Jeane Dixon did not flinch. Her reply was quiet, steady, and absolute. No more than 6 months. And she was right. A few months later, on April 12, 1945, Roosevelt died exactly as she had foretold. His successor, just as she had predicted years earlier, was Senator Harry S. Truman, a man she had once told, long before he believed it possible, that one day he would become president of the United States. What kind of person develops this ability? How does a child from a traditional Catholic family in Wisconsin grow up to become someone who can peer through time itself and see events that haven't happened yet? Dixon's story begins in 1904, when she was born into a world that had no frame of reference for the kind of gift she would eventually possess. Even as a small child, Dixon displayed abilities that left her parents both amazed and deeply concerned. At age 5, she began insisting that her mother needed to give her an envelope with a black border around it. She made this request repeatedly, day after day, even though no such envelope existed in their home. Her mother tried to explain that they didn't have anything like what Jeane was describing. 10 days later, a funeral announcement arrived in the mail, informing the family that Jeane's grandfather had passed away. The letter came in an envelope with a black border, exactly as the 5-year-old had described. This wasn't the kind of thing that happened once and then faded into family folklore. Dixon's visions continued throughout her childhood, growing more detailed and accurate as she got older. When her father went on a business trip to Chicago, 7-year-old Jeane excitedly told her mother that Daddy was going to bring home a big dog with black and white fur. Her mother laughed it off, knowing that no one in the family had ever discussed getting a pet, and that communication with her traveling husband was limited. But when her father returned from his trip, he had indeed brought home a black and white dog that matched his daughter's description perfectly. The turning point came in 1911, when Jeane's parents heard about an Egyptian palm reader who had recently arrived in California. This woman had built a reputation in the immigrant community for her uncanny ability to read people's futures through their hands. Desperate to understand their daughter's strange gift, Jeane's parents decided to make the journey to have their child examined by this mysterious fortune teller. After examining the young girl's palm for several long moments, the Egyptian woman's expression changed dramatically. Her eyes widened with something that looked almost like fear mixed with reverence. She turned to Jeane's parents and spoke words that would echo through the decades. "Your daughter will become a great prophet," she said, "someone who can see across the barriers of time itself." Then she did something that would change Jeane's life forever. She handed the little girl a small crystal ball and a piece of silk. The moment Jeane's fingers touched that crystal sphere, something extraordinary happened. The child stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, her eyes seeming to focus on something far beyond the physical world around her. Then, in a voice that sounded far too mature for her 7 years, she looked directly at the palm reader and said, "Be careful around your stove because you're going to get burned very soon." A few days later, the Egyptian woman suffered a severe kitchen accident, exactly as little Jeane had warned. But the story doesn't end there. Jeane also turned to her older brother during one of their backyard games and casually mentioned that he was going to become a famous athlete someday. At the time, it seemed like nothing more than childhood imagination. 10 years later, her brother was being celebrated as one of America's greatest football players. But here's what makes Jeane Dixon's story absolutely terrifying. She didn't just predict random events or make vague statements that could be interpreted multiple ways. Her visions were so specific, so detailed, and so accurate that they defied every rational explanation science could offer. When she began having premonitions about world leaders and global events, the precision of her predictions became legendary. In 1945, during Winston Churchill's visit to the United States, the British Prime Minister sought out Jeane Dixon for a private consultation. Churchill, who was at the height of his power and influence, asked her a simple question: would he be re-elected in the upcoming general election? Without any hesitation, Dixon told him that he would not win, that fate had already decided his political future regardless of his current popularity and prestige. Churchill's face turned red with anger. Here was a man who had led Britain through its darkest hour, who was universally respected as one of the greatest statesmen of the century, being told by an American woman that he was about to lose everything. The idea seemed absolutely ridiculous to everyone who heard it. But just a few months later, Churchill suffered a devastating electoral defeat, exactly as Dixon had predicted. However, the prophecy that truly established her reputation as America's most feared and respected psychic was her prediction about President John F. Kennedy. In 1956, long before Kennedy had even officially announced his presidential campaign, Dixon published an article in Parade magazine that sent shockwaves through the political establishment. She predicted that the Democratic candidate would win the 1960 election, but that this president would be assassinated during his first term in office. At the time, most people dismissed this as nothing more than sensational journalism designed to sell magazines. Kennedy wasn't even a serious contender for the nomination yet, and the idea that someone could predict not only his victory, but also his death seemed completely absurd. But as 1963 approached, Dixon began experiencing much more vivid and disturbing visions about the president's fate. She described seeing a dark cloud hanging over the White House like a storm that wouldn't break. She saw invisible hands erasing the president's name from official documents and plaques. Most chillingly of all, she kept seeing a specific name associated with the tragedy. A name that started with the letter O, had an S as the second letter, and ended with a letter that curved like a fishhook. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. Within hours, the name Lee Harvey Oswald was flashing across television screens around the world. The name matched Dixon's vision perfectly. The O, the S, and that final D curved exactly like the hook she had described years earlier. From that moment forward, the press began calling her the Seer of Washington. She was no longer just an eccentric woman making wild predictions. She had become living proof that some people possess abilities that science cannot explain or understand. But all of these incredible predictions were just preparation for what Dixon considered her most important prophecy. Throughout her career, she spoke repeatedly about events that would unfold in the year 2025. She wrote about this year with a sense of urgency and dread that was unlike anything she had expressed about previous predictions. In her 1971 book, The Call to Glory, Dixon described a vision that reached decades into the future. She saw the year 2020 as the beginning of what she called a global war, but not a traditional war fought with armies and weapons. Instead, she envisioned a war fought with disease, a pandemic that would bring the entire world to its knees and change the course of human history. When COVID-19 emerged in 2020, many people remembered Dixon's words with a mixture of amazement and terror. Had she really seen this global catastrophe coming 50 years before it happened? And if her vision of 2020 was accurate, what did that mean for her predictions about 2025? According to the predictions recorded in her book, My Life and Prophecies, Jeane Dixon made a chilling claim that 2025 would mark a bloody turning point between two major powers in Asia, China, and Russia. In her vision, the coming war would go far beyond politics or disputed borders. It would be a struggle for control over the destiny of the world. And when the dust settled, she claimed, China would stand victorious. At first, it may sound far-fetched, especially now, with 2025 already well underway, and no such conflict has erupted between those two nations. But history has shown that while Dixon's prophecies were often eerily accurate in outcome, they sometimes blurred the identities of those involved. Today, the world stands on the brink of a very different kind of conflict, not with bombs and bullets, but with markets and trade policies, a tense economic standoff between the United States and China. And it raises the question, could Dixon's vision have been misinterpreted? Was she not seeing a military clash at all, but the rise of this very trade war? The truth is, there's no way to know. Only time will reveal the answer. But what makes this year even more unsettling is that Jeane Dixon wasn't the only one who warned about 2025. A Japanese manga artist named Tatsuki published a graphic novel in 1999 called The Future I Saw, which contained 15 prophetic dreams. 14 of those dreams have already come true with frightening accuracy. The 15th dream, that recently happened in July 2025 about tsunami, a disaster that strikes in the South China Sea. And the story doesn't end there. Even more disturbing is the story of someone claiming to be a time traveler from the year 2062 who appeared on Japanese internet forums. Before the devastating March 11th earthquake and tsunami, this mysterious figure posted warnings urging people to seek higher ground. Then, in 2022, the same person returned with another message, Prepare for something unprecedented in the South China Sea in July 2025. Are these just coincidences? Random predictions that happen to point to the same time period? Or is there something about 2025 that multiple people across different cultures and time periods have been able to sense? Jeane Dixon believed that while 2025 would bring unprecedented challenges and conflicts, it would also mark the emergence of a figure of extraordinary compassion and wisdom, someone who would help humanity navigate through the darkness and find a path toward lasting peace. Whether you believe in prophecies or not, one thing is undeniable. We are now living in the year that Jeane Dixon warned us about for decades. Whatever happens next, we can no longer say we weren't warned. The real question isn't whether these predictions will come true. The real question is whether we're prepared to face whatever challenges lie ahead, and whether we'll have the wisdom to learn from the warnings we've been given. If you've ever experienced something that felt like a glimpse into the future, or if you've had dreams that later came true, share your story in the comments below. And if you want to stay updated on more mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about reality, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the future, whatever it holds, is arriving faster than we think.